So I have a number of sponsors, affiliate links in the way that it's set up that have kindly allowed me to share their services, really. The first one is Mike Clayton, and Mike runs online PM courses, and it is a great resource for getting those fundamentals of project management trained, reasonably priced, and Mike presents it in an accessible and clear manner. You can check out some of his videos on his YouTube channel and kind of give you a view of where they are. But the code for that, if you go to nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, all one word, lowercase, that'll redirect you to it. There's very different levels that you can buy. You can buy individual courses, you can buy pathways as well, if you like. And I get a kickback off those. Mike kindly shares me that. So if you do jump on and use it, I hope you find it really useful. I think he has money back guarantees and things like that as well. So there's very limited risk on that. So jump on that, and that again is nigelcreaser.com/online PM courses, and enjoy. Today I'd like to welcome back JPStewart PMP back to the podcast. As the founder and owner of JPStewart Consulting LLC, he offers a wide range of consulting and training services to help organisations achieve their strategic goals, improve their performance and deliver the right projects with the right resources. He's managed and supported projects in various domains such as IT, pharmaceuticals and medical device, and he's created project management simulations and courseware for educational purposes. His mission is to help instill best practices and foster a culture of collaboration, innovation and learning in project management. He provides coaching and training in Agile methodologies to help better deliver outcomes for patients and stakeholders. And he's got 20 years experience as a project manager and a Agile coach, and holds several credentials: PMP, CSM, PMI-ACP. He's also a co-author of a book, and we'll talk a bit about that today, and the reason that Jim's here. Great Meetings Build Great Teams, which talks about how to facilitate effective meetings in projects. So Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nigel. And that guy sounds pretty impressive. I'd like to meet him. I should update the information. It's actually 25 years of project management, 10 years of Agile, I think about 10 certifications. The odd thing is that I was very happy with just PMP for years and years and years, and it wasn't until Agile came along I got different ones. So I think your introduction or your reading of my bio gave a pretty good idea. I've worked, like a lot of us, in full-time or organizations, but I'm working as an independent consultant for the past 20 years now. Which gives me, all that variety of stuff to do, more so than somebody who's working in one organization. Pharmaceutical one time, IT another time, running projects, consult, all that stuff that you talked about. So I won't belabor that too much. I'm in the greater Boston area, and I have been talking about this, or wrote this book, the previous book we're talking about here, with my colleague Rich Maltzman, who isn't here today. He teaches at Boston University. He's doing that right now as we speak, so I'm somewhat speaking on his behalf. And we've known each other for a number of years, about as long as I have had my company. And we worked together a number of things, creating courseware and whatnot. And one day, he had written several books, and I said, why don't we write a book together? He said, somebody said to me, how about those big meetings you run? So I would co-facilitate 2-day planning meetings. And Rich and I, long story short, wrote a book on that. It was released several years ago and did okay. You don't put books like this out to become a millionaire, but it doesn't work that way. It's good collateral, good to do, publish or perish. And then we decided to update it to the latest version. I was telling Nigel before the call that the first one was more based around these big 2-day planning meetings. This one still has that, but based more around the remote world we find ourselves in post-pandemic and those tools and the science of meetings. For me personally, I live here with my wife. My kids are moved out into Boston. I didn't realize it was in the picture. My wife moves things around in here in my office. guitar in the corner. I play guitar as a hobby, mostly rock and blues and stuff like that. The music that we invented here in the States and that the Brits took and perfected, quite frankly. If you took the British music out of my collection, it would be very poor. So thank you for that. So that's me kind of in a nutshell. And currently, I'm just to tell you what I'm doing now. I finished an Agile transformation project not too long ago in pharmaceutical, and I'm doing a few side projects. I'm coaching a woman at a company at a university that you would know, and I'm working on a simulation with a customer. Just finished a simulation where I'm the subject matter expert, and I'm also writing strategy guides and I also write PMP style questions for the PMP exam, not for PMI, but for some of their resellers. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. You can see the rest of my LinkedIn page. It's rather boring, I suppose.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. I notice, and I can't tell, I'm guessing it's rugby union. You've got your picture, or is it rugby league on your LinkedIn profile at the background?
I don't know which one it is, but are you an Agile guy? Are you an Agilist?
I am. I'm a Scrum Master and a Product Owner certified.
Right.
I haven't managed to use them in anger properly, but I kind of have an appreciation of some Agile stuff. Yeah.
So so you have the training and done. So the Scrum concept, just to talk about that for a minute, comes from rugby. Yeah. So I don't know where exactly I got the picture. Probably bought it from the wrong place, but just that idea that there was an article written in the mid '90s in Harvard Business School. It was called the New Product Development, and they came up with the idea of a Scrum. So we have Scrum Masters, all that's Agile terminology, and so it seemed apt as much as anything else to put that picture up there. So that's the derivation of that.
I was wondering whether it was that or whether it was with the Rugby World Cup on at the moment, whether it was something to do with that, but as well. So
the funny rugby is not unknown here in the States, but until you just told me there was a Rugby World Cup, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So we're just, if we're fanatical about anything, it's our version of football, but we don't follow all that. We don't even really follow your football as religiously as you folks do. We have it, but it's not on the level of baseball, our football, and those other sports. So it just hasn't been caught on. I don't know why.
Just the way it is, isn't it? The way it is.
Yeah.
It's interesting because obviously we mentioned there that you and Rich were on the show, and we were just looking back just before the call. Now, I think I put the episode out in July. I'm sure in July 2021. So I'm sure it was actually the conversation we probably had latter part of 2020. So obviously we were in the pandemic, probably deep in the pandemic at that time.
Yeah.
And still, I think, really at that point, adapting to dealing with this temporary change in the world. That, I think, our adoption of the remote working approaches were out of necessity rather than necessarily moving towards where we are now, which is becoming the hybrid approach and things like that it's part of business as usual for a lot of us now. But it brings its own challenges. And I've, for many years, even before that, I've had teams where I haven't been physically located with them. I've had remote teams, I've had teams abroad, teams in different time zones. And there's always there was a difficulty in managing those teams because of that remoteness. And I know that I've had experience where going through all these different things of using video, not using video. Teams seems to be coming out, Teams are around, and all the different tools are coming out with new approaches to interact, and technologies just seems to be sort of rumbling on quite quickly still around the remote side. It's still not, it's still lagging behind that face-to-face communication of meetings. And it's not as bad as the sort of pre-COVID, where it was the conference call. No one was expected to be on video. It was a conference call. And I remember the days when you'd have 30 people in the room and you're the one person in the car dialing
Right.
in
Yeah.
to give an
Yeah.
update.
Nobody can hear
and
you.
you can't, no one can hear you. You can't
Right.
hear the person who sat at the far
Right.
end of that desk who talks really quietly and looks down at their feet.
Mm.
And we're now in that situation with headsets on, and we're still learning that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that... It's a really big question here, really. And it's
Mm.
kind of... I suspect there are fundamentals that we can apply across remote, in-person, hybrid meetings. What are the things that... What did you see that wasn't working that triggered you to enhance the book that you'd done before with, obviously, the planning meetings?
I listened to everything you said. And I was really reflecting on that. I remember in 2020, I don't know how it was there. But there was a period of time where they told us not to leave the house at all because there was no vaccine. So we were literally stuck in the house. It might have been right around that time or shortly before or after. I think, first of all, I want to say one thing. I agree wholeheartedly that we will never, maybe you didn't make the statement, maybe you kind of were making it. We won't really replace face-to-face in person. It just can't happen because unless we get to holograms or some technology I can't foresee. But Project Management Institute and the Agilists both preach face-to-face is the best way, in person is the best way. So we do the best we can when we're not that. What happened during the pandemic in this, junior sociologist mind is that everything was brought forward many years. I'll give you an example of that, and I'll get to getting to your question. A friend of mine who I've met going to workshops, going to roundtables. I'm going to one next week. She runs one for project management offices. And she works at a major hospital in Boston. And she built the PMO, and she's a VP. She's been there for like 20 years. And that's her life. She told me when I last saw her that in 2020, I believe it was 2020, maybe 2021, she had plans to roll out the technology, remote technology, to doctors, nurses, the entire staff over the course of the year. Because of the pandemic, they rolled it out in a weekend. So, of course, then they were expected to roll everything out in a weekend. I said, well, wait, that was a special case. Telehealth was rolled forward a lot. I've been to telehealth doctor meetings and whatnot. So I think every time you read about something like a break, like a pandemic, it's a horrible situation that made other things better. Pandemics in Europe years ago, the Black Plague, health got better. They stopped throwing things out the window and whatnot, right? So health services got better. So I think in this case, we're in the middle of a quiet revolution. And I mean that in terms of businesses. My daughter works for a bio firm in Cambridge, Mass. And she was working like everybody else and then had to go home for a year and came back, and it was like a time capsule. Calendars from a year and a half ago on the wall. Half-filled cups of coffee, like it had been abandoned like a nuclear war or something. So she came back from that, and now she's at a 3-day in, 2-day home, or vice versa situation. And there are companies here that are saying, you must come back in full time or you won't work here anymore. And a lot of the employees are saying, I will go work someplace else. So we're in the middle of this quiet revolution of the quiet quitting, people making decisions to find out they can be more productive. My customer, who I'm also on the board of his training company, they write all courseware and simulations and online things. When I would go visit them in the small office several years ago, there were 20 people always there. When I go in now, it's a ghost town. When the pandemic hit, they went for home. He and everybody else got much more productive. Even the CEO was convinced. He has a 2-hour commute to the office. He doesn't have to make anymore. That's 4 hours a day or whatever. So when we wrote the first book, we had one of our friends, a guy named Wayne Termel, who's written books on distance learning with him. Could you write a chapter for us on remote? Not that we didn't know, but you're kind of the expert here. And I've been asking about, and I'm leading up to the answer here, remote tools to do, stickies, post-it notes across there. We didn't have much on that. A couple of years later, where was Zoom then? I knew of Zoom because the others was using it. Zoom is a big deal now. Teams is a big deal for remote. You're using something, Riverside. So with all these things have gotten better in quality. I could hardly find anything other than the WebEx or whatever to use to do what we're doing here. Zoom is here. Miro has come along. So from a technology point of view, Miro allows me to use sticky notes, post-it notes across there, share things. I can do Agile ceremonies. I've got other tools I can do that with. So in a very short time, answering your question on two levels. Technology-wise, we've vastly improved our tools. Society-wise, we're still adjusting because people are somewhat going in the office, not going in the office. It's having ramifications. A lot of the restaurants in downtown Boston that were for lunch are closed because there's nobody there to have lunch. So we have social ramifications. Companies are still working out. They're very much in what we call some of them are in a theory X mode. You must be here so I can see you working. Transitioning to a theory Y mode of you can work from home and get things done. So I think the technology is happening, the mindset is shifting, and I think we're past the point where everybody got on the Zoom and said, oh, it looks like the Brady Bunch. And so it's a generation getting used to it. After a while, it's nothing. My wife is a teacher, did training that way with kids. And I think the biggest adjustment is people, and we talk about this in the book, adjusting to technology. So if this is the way we're going to work, don't stare at yourself on the camera all day long. You don't carry a mirror around all day long and look at yourself and deal with things like Zoom fatigue, which is a real thing. So I think what I've seen, to answer your question, that's a long way of answering it, is changes in society, changes in the technology, trying to somewhat keep up with it, the knowledge that face-to-face is still best. But this is the brave new world, and we need to adjust to it and do what you and I are doing right here. And I think it's my observation on working this way for the past couple of years. I've hardly gone into an office. I worked great this way in the pharmaceutical. I did a project in the Middle East for 4 months without leaving this office, and it worked. So it's doable. And then there were cultural things, although it turns out the guys I was working with were techies in the Middle East. Well, techies are the same. It turns out. So whatever cultural differences we had were wiped away. So I'm not sure if that addresses your question, but I hope it does. It's just, we're in the middle of something. The jury is out on how well this will all work. My opinion.
Yeah. I kind of concur with that, and it's quite interesting actually that culture thing is that I'm seeing it myself, is that culture shift is hard and uncomfortable for everyone from a leadership point of view, as in CEO leadership, where you've got, as you say, some of the big organizations going, right, you've got to be in every day,
right?
Because there's twofold there. The roles that some of these people are involved in benefit from that close collaboration, that proximity to others for part of their job. I'm not convinced for the whole of the job, but part of it.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is new to organisation, whether that be completely new to an organisation or new into the workplace. I'm an old git. I've worked at the place I'm at for 18 years now. I have a really strong network in the area that I work. You build that up. We've got people who join the organisation who have been there 2 weeks. I was talking to some who just under 2 weeks. They know no one. And if they're in the office, if they're not in the office, they'll meet like this. Actually, if people don't turn on the video, they don't meet that person. And even then, it's weaker than if you're physically meeting the person. And that culture of people feeling what the culture of the organisation is goes away. They don't get that feeling unless they're together. Right. And I know that a lot of companies are struggling with, how do you do that? How do you get that engagement? How do I sell it to someone like me who can pick up the phone to anyone in our organisational hierarchy and find someone senior enough to get down to get somewhere, or someone who's down in the weeds and can fix something and point me in the right direction? I can find someone. So what's the benefit of me driving for 40 minutes, an hour, having a wash, getting dressed, looking tidy, and heading in there? Because I can do everything here in quotes. But I've kind of, it's kind of being a bit selfish and selfless in some ways. You need to be able to be, I think, is that you can go in and go, right. So I'm there for someone. Yep. Like I was having a session with someone today we were chatting away and they were doing something. It was on Excel or something like that. And I said, do you know you can do that or something, a little shortcut? And they're like, well, no, I never knew that. Now, I wouldn't have seen the fact that they were doing that on their keyboard unless I was stood next to them. And it's just a little thing, it's saving a couple of seconds. But it's those those keyboard shortcuts that you grew up in late 80s, early 90s using because mouse technology wasn't amazing. You ended up, that's the way you needed to do it.
Right.
And you kind of got those things you can give to people. And I wouldn't be able to give that and help that person speed up what they're doing and build that relationship with them. So I've committed earlier in the year to being at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, into my office local to me. But not just for me, but for being there for other people as well. And I kind of see that as being very much a meetings day. And this is kind of where it comes round to, of what I don't want to be in remote meetings. I want to be in face-to-face meetings with people, building relationships, building rapport, having a whiteboard to scribble on together.
Exactly.
And with a big monitor up there. And I think there's a culture, but then we've got to flip it on the head and go, right, okay, if we've got a big meeting and we've got a regular team meeting, how do we make sure that you don't have 4 people in a room and the whole conversation sticks on them and that 6 people on the telly feel unrepresented? With those scenarios, what do you see as what are the kind of tips that you see from there, and the kind of,
I want to go back and
not giving away the whole book, but I'm guessing there's some.
By the way, I will, because if I'm not stopped, if Rich were here, we would. There are people who have asked.
Okay, so just read out chapter 1 for us then.
Yeah, I'll read the whole book. What
I'll do, I'll just stick this on the Patreon's page, and I can sell it on to make the money off the back.
There you go. We'll split the proceeds. I'll tell everything, but So I just want to go back a step. On a couple. You're right, because Boston is now the biotech. We have 1,000 biotech companies. We're the biotech capital of the world, yeah. And part of the reason for that, the universities and the hospitals and whatnot, but also companies that have moved here because they had the innovation. They can walk out their door and meet other people. So they still need to do that. No argument, and I'm not a defender of one must work at home at all times. In my pharmaceutical case, I worked for the better part of a year, and my boss said, I was a contractor or a consultant, she said, you need to be here to meet with XYZ people. But she didn't say be here 5 days a week. So we sort of felt it out. And it became a situation of, well, who are these people I need to... So I would do things like, you'll enjoy this. We're in a suburb, not in Boston. And I would say, I'd go in. And I said to somebody, we can have the meeting, knowing my boss will be there, have the meeting in the office. She said, I don't care if we can do it from remote. So I kept trying to have in-person meetings with people who were remote. So I'd be going in the office, and they'd all be remote. So it took a while to figure out how often do I need to be. And like you said, the guy I was working with, he was that was my boss, but there was a guy who was the product owner of the entire transformation. I knew that when he was in, I wanted to be in a lot of the time. We would go to a room, meet, and go to the whiteboard. He was a real good drawer. He's from not being facetious. He drew things out. He was very good at explaining to me how pharmaceutical worked. He would explain the drug thing to me that I needed to understand to a certain extent. He could have done it online, but they were great in person. But what I'm saying is, before I get to your question about the other question is you have to, the companies and individuals have to work out. You worked out your situation. You want to be in a day or two a week, whatever, so you can, I won't say mentor, but be there for those other people. I worked that. And I finally realized what my boss was talking about. She wanted me to be there, especially for the lab people. We're going to work with lab people. But that didn't happen to the end of my tenure. So I worked that out. The other thing I wanted to say that came to mind was the generational thing about this technology. And I'm not somebody that says, my generation is great, yours is bad. But interestingly, the older generations get the harder time they have adapting to this technology. And it isn't just people who are older than me. I'm a baby boomer. My daughter tells me, who's a millennial, that I'm one of the relatively few baby boomers, because I have an IT background, that is comfortable with the technology. She tells me astonishingly, a lot of my peers barely know how to turn the thing on. But then you have, like my kids, millennials, are comfortable with every kind of technology. Oh, you have to download this, and by the time you tell them, they've done it. So I want to get that generational thing out of the way. Your question was about these meetings where some people are remote, some are not remote. We talk about this, and this actually came from our guy, Wayne, who said to keep the people who are not in the room in the room. For example, tell them to keep, they don't have to necessarily mute themselves unless they've got the toilets flushing or they're cooking something or whatever. So they're online. Make them feel like they're part of it. So if you and I, Nigel, were in a room together with 3 or 4 other people, and we had one guy who was remote, make sure he's involved or she's involved. It's a woman, and so it's like leave your line open. We'll chat things. We'll make sure we'll refer to you periodically. We'll show you things. Make sure that you're engaged in it. I think though that has become less of a problem in my observation than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Especially when we had those speaker phones. We call those spider phones. Those speaker phones, and there was everybody now. People can sit in their car, and I've done it on Zoom on their phone. So I think it's up to the meeting leader, because it's always his or her ownership, to make sure the other people feel engaged, and it's up to the people who are remote to make sure that they are engaged. But I personally think, and I can be a one-man data point on this, that it's become easier to involve them because the technology is better. There's no excuse for not being able to Zoom in this and that. And by the way, I always encourage people not to. I can't stand when I get in a meeting and say, "Oh, can everybody bring their camera up? We want to see you." Maybe I'm having a bad hair day, as we call it. Some people don't want to be on camera, so they might come on. Hi, I'm Jim. I'm Mary, etc. I'm not going to be on camera. Fine, turn it off. Maybe turn it off when you're speaking. Turn your camera off so you're looking at yourself all the time. So I think a cognizance of on the meeting leaders front. People don't want to be on camera all the time. Let them not be on camera. 2, make sure that they're engaged in the conversation, that they're there, they're present, feel like they're part of it. And 3, I think make sure that the technology is good. You've tested technology, it works. You share information. I think if you do all that, I think if you engage people and give them a reason to be there, they're going to drop off. If you're not keeping them, I don't want to use the word entertained, but I almost said entertained. And so if my meeting is boring, that's why I'm going to hear clicking on the keyboard, because they may be doing something else anyway. But I need to engage them somehow by bringing them in as part of the discussion. What do you think, Nigel? What do you think, Ted? What do you think? Engage them like that. If you don't engage them, their mind's going to drift. That's true of people in physical meetings and remote meetings. And also, you as a leader need to remember about things like Zoom fatigue. Are people tired from that? And maybe give them more frequent breaks than you might give it an in-person thing. We're 45 minutes in, let's take 10 minutes. Things like that. I think that helps a lot. I think we're in a better place than we were. It will never be solved to the level you'd like. It'll never be perfect. People will drift.
No, it's funny. We were talking about where I am. There's this engaging people in a hybrid scenario, getting people involved is something that we're trying to improve on.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was, and this is a group of project managers. This is,
yeah.
And one of the things that was suggested is that we should adopt this isn't a policy, but it's kind of adopt the policy of the approach of video first as an organization to help. Like, there are situations where we know there are people who've been involved in the organization and they have a manager who didn't turn on the video and they didn't have an avatar picture of them. So the person who is working for them, I'm not sure if it was an actual in our area or somewhere, had never met, didn't even know they could walk past them in the street and wouldn't have a clue that was their manager. And it kind of, there's a couple of pennies dropped in there, and it was, the challenge was put there, and some people come back with the challenge of, well, some thing is, we've got people walking behind me, I've got different situations, and it's like people realising that, like, we use Teams, and Teams has the blur facility to blur your background or your backgrounds, and we've got corporate backgrounds to use and things like that, and people hadn't actually realised they could do that. And that was a big one. That was recently, in the last couple of weeks, that someone's spotted that. And that conversation's obviously been going on at different times, and people have been resistant to put on the camera because of that situation.
I see.
But it was because they didn't know how to use the technology. Right. And so that again, if there's project managers listening there and they're struggling to get people to turn on the cameras and be able to see them and build that rapport, or anyone who's listened to it. If you're using products like Teams, or even not, ask the people. That's what I took when I did my book on remote thing, where the bit 1 page on remote working that I did. The thing is, the most important thing I thought was asking, and we all forget that. If someone hasn't got the camera on, don't assume they're just being grumpy. Don't assume they're just deciding they want to do something else and they're watching the cricket or the rugby on the telly. Ask them.
Right.
What? I notice you don't have your camera on it. Why not?
Right.
And when you ask someone that, they turn around and say, I've got a pile of washing behind me, and do you know what I mean? A view of a really horrible building, or so. And it's kind of okay. And that means they don't know how to use the blurring, they don't know how to use the background and green screen stuff. And so
education.
Just use that. Education.
But
you don't know unless you ask.
Right.
And I do. It's funny actually. We have a regular meeting, and off the back of this session where we said to do it, we've all started doing it a bit more. And I have an update meeting where the team update me. And I kind of gather the latest project updates for the 5, 6, 7 projects. And everyone had the video on today. I started with mine on. They'd already started with theirs on. Everyone had theirs. One of the guys said, I'm going to turn my video off. I can't be doing looking at myself. And that's fine. The idea was video on first. Hi, I'm here. Because then people know who you are, because your avatar doesn't look like you. You get a chance. It builds better, stronger relationships. But accept the fact that some people say, I don't want it on today. Yeah, I'm like you say, I'm having a bad hair day. Yeah. I'm really fatigued. I hate looking at myself. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I'm looking at you now. I have to move my screen around so you're in front, just above my camera. So I'm trying to look down the lens of the camera instead of me doing that and looking at me, because I'm so handsome. That it's irresistible.
Resist yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But it is distracting, isn't it? Because you sit there and you go, what am I putting that face for? And you're going like that, and it distracts you.
That's a different topic than. So topic 1 is, I like the idea. Ask people to come on camera. First couple of meetings, maybe they'll stay on it, and then they can even drop off into it. The people talk and come back on. But the subject of your own camera, like I said, now I'm looking at myself here. I'm so used to it, but turn yourself off. Do the self view off, because we don't walk around all day looking at ourselves in a mirror, and this is what's caused people to become self-conscious. So I do is I turn my self view off, and I turn it on every 10 minutes or so to make sure I'm not slumping like this. So, I'm slumping, and I didn't realize it. I've gotten very comfortable half asleep. So I think that etiquette of that is important, and I think it's really incumbent upon teams to understand, like you said, how to use the technology, and like I've been saying, the existence of things like Zoom fatigue and people, there's even one of the things in the Zoom fatigue. We didn't write this article. We have the link in the book somewhere about how people this restricts our mobility. I mean, we'd be sitting anyway, but perhaps every meeting. Sometimes people get up and they go to the whiteboard, they'll walk around. Someone might walk over here to get a soda or something. So there's a lot of features to that make it difficult to do it this way. And I think if people are educated, companies have education around the tools they're using, not just, here's a tool. There was a tool, I'm trying to remember the name of it now. I knew it well a couple months ago, and they were using it. We were working with France, and they were using a particular tool. It was like, here it is. Can I learn how to use it? And then they expect everybody to know it. People need some kind of education, because every tool, this one is probably different from Teams, from Zoom, etc. I don't know where all the buttons and switches are. Right, so I think people know how to use it, and I think sometimes too. I just thought of something when you're talking about. I've had teams where I say, Mary, just picking that out of the air, would you mind running the meeting this week? And no, okay, it gives them a cognizance of what's involved, and they might sit there and say, is Jim listening? So everybody in a team eventually gets a chance to run it if they're at that level of how hard is it to do it. Find out what it's involved in running a meeting, so they're cognizant of how they come across in that too. If you're comfortable having people run it, it's not always the case. I think, though, everybody should know how to run a meeting. If I have somebody in my team who's unwilling or unable to run a meeting, I'm concerned about their growth, because it's fundamental, again, to be able to do it. If they can't run a meeting, I'm not saying I'd fire them. I'm just saying I would get them to be the point where they can run a meeting. As somebody who has trained a lot of project managers, over thousands project managers, PMP training and whatnot, you'd be astonished perhaps So, by the way, Rich and I very much think of running a class like a meeting, because it is. It's a meeting where we have to sort of I have a 4-day PMP class. I got to make sure that all the techniques that I talk about I use. I've got to control what we call the goblins. I've got to keep things. I've got to facilitate, keep things on time, etc. So you'd be amazed at the number of students that I have who are professional project managers. I might have 15 in a class. I've had 30, whatever. These are relatively small, not hundreds. When they raise their hand, ask a question, they ask it like this. Their voices don't project beyond their nose. I'm thinking, how does this person ever get up in front of a steering committee and present? And if they don't, in the world of project management, which is more strategic, you've got to do that. I want all my project managers who've had a team to have the ability to run a meeting, to present to a board, which is a meeting, to run a status meeting, to run Azure meetings. I want them to be large and in charge. We talk about that. So I think that's, for me, a skill I'd also always want to cultivate in my teams, is the ability to speak professionally, to run meetings, and to learn it. And not to worry if they don't. I had one guy I was coaching, he ran a retrospective in Agile. Between us, he did a pretty horrible job, but it was his first one. So I coached him afterwards, and he just got better at it. He coached people, and then I've had the fantastic event of coaching people on running meetings and running out of things to say because they were doing it so well. They took my advice and gave me some advice of their own. One meeting. So to give you one example of the most mundane thing, right? I think you and I talked about this a little bit, about little gains, Kaizen, small change. So there were two women in the pharmaceutical, one up in Canada, who was the product owner for this particular line of pharma, and then a woman in the PMO who was her scrum master running her meetings. Now, why is a woman who runs the PMO also being a scrum master, which is not as lofty a position? Because they were short on scrum masters. They were a dynamic team. They were a really good team. They were our gold standard Agile team, except for one problem. Their meetings always went over. They had an hour meeting once a week to discuss all the various features of this drug they were developing. And I would come on as an observer. I wouldn't typically say a word unless they addressed me. And afterwards, I would send them a note via Teams, or I write them an email. And I said, it appears that all your meetings are running 10, 15 minutes over. Yeah, what can we do about that? I said, has it occurred to you that you start 10 minutes after the hour? That you come on at 8 o'clock, you talk for 2 minutes, and you wait for everybody to show up. You're always starting 10 minutes late. I said, how about this as a radical idea? Start on time, or as close to on time as you can, say 2 minutes after the hour. People will get that idea. They'll catch up later. You've got cards on your Agile board, your task board, that tell what happened, or they can update later. They started doing that, and they started ending on time. There was no genius thing in that. It was just I was an observer that saw what they couldn't see, and they instantly said, of course. So those small little things. See, the beauty part about Agile, we fix one thing at a time. We do a retrospective. I'm not selling it, just saying. That was the thing they fixed that week. That guy in the retrospective, in a retrospective, you say, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we improve? He spent most of the hour, whatever the time was, reading the things that went well, reading them from the spreadsheet. I said, next time, just say quickly what went well, keep it brief, and then focus on what didn't go well and what you can improve. You've done what went well, applause, applause. Focus on this, focus on this. He was able to do that small change. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, or, as we say, boil the ocean in one thing. We're going to fix all our meetings in the company. Fix one thing at a time. Fix one small thing at a time. It'll get better.
I think and I think it is a thing that I've seen and I've heard others recount it as well, as around change fatigue, and during the whole that pandemic era, there's been leading up to that, we had digital transformations going on and lots of things changing and things like that. So a lot of change on change anyway, social change, socio-economic change. And then obviously with the pandemic and everything that's happened since then, there is a continued acceleration and an increase in the amount, and we're in this VUCA environment. It's funny actually, because in the November of 2019, I went to a PMI event in the UK down It was their 50th anniversary celebration event, and it was all around volatile, uncertain, complex,
VUCA.
and
Right. Sure.
I always forget the A, whatever the A is.
Me
Anyway,
too.
VUCA. Yeah. So
Right.
essentially, it was about the fact that everything was a bit wild, a bit uncertain, and a bit crazy. And then suddenly in March, it made that look like everything was bleeding organised. And then
Right.
it's continued after, isn't it? The rise of generative AI and things like that, which we'll talk about AI and using in the meetings in that as well in a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's something that's obviously, again, that is changing day on day. In fact, I saw something today, Ricardo Vargas put in his predictions for the next 6 months on LinkedIn of what's going to happen with some of the generative AI. And he says not because he knows what's going to happen, it's just his gut feel of what's going to happen, and he's going to, for interest, have a look next year because I think the latest thing is that ChatGPT has just hooked it in so that it's going to be up to date information. It's going to be pumping out rather than archive information or historic information sort of thing. So immediately you get the challenge of more up to date information in there, which again is a bit of a game changer for that. Yeah. But it's funny, a couple of things you're saying there about people getting up and wandering around. We the session I was talking about before we had earlier today, we were playing around with backgrounds because again, the guys are we're kind of experimenting with the video. I discovered something, the together mode on Teams that you get where you can have it as if it's an auditorium. We were playing with that in a session the other day. Me mainly because I saw it and I thought, I wonder if this will make it. I'll change it and I'll look at everyone like that today because there was quite a few people on, and then I didn't realise it changed for everybody on the call. So it just suddenly completely changed. So distracted. I said, apologies. But then I said, there's a button there. I can turn it off and just do it for me. And then I saw another button that said custom backgrounds. I clicked that and it took me off to a Microsoft thing. I could create my own. So essentially it's got this template, which is like a PowerPoint slide sort of thing, but you have avatars for the number of people that you have in a meeting, and then you can create a scene and then place them where you want to. So I did the Muppets. So I created Waldorf and Statler, several Waldorf and Statler things, and then just had put them there while we were on the meeting, and then popped it up there. It was kind of one of the, when you grab something, you think, let's play with that.
Now, did everybody see? Was everybody else ever able to see that?
Yeah.
Did you put it? So that's fun. I mean, that's the other thing is like, your people, icebreakers, fun things. They don't have to be death marches, these meetings, right? I mean, I talked about starting that meeting on time. I didn't mean to say to them, hi, how are you doing? Or how was your weekend? But you have to go through that kind of quickly. Of course, cultures are different. There's one thing we mentioned. There's one of your fellow countrymen, Richard Lewis, wrote a book called When Cultures Collide. And it was recommended to me by a student, and we quote that in there. They talk about how meetings in Germany and I think the UK and the US start more or less on time. And by the time you get to Spain and Italy, it's sort of like 20 minutes of meandering, and eventually we'll get around to it, right? That's not a joke. That's just the way it is. So you have to acclimate yourself to the culture. So let me say, for those of you who are perhaps watching this from other cultures, here in the U.S., we're going to try to start at near as on time. That's neither right nor wrong. It just is. If I come to work if I go to work in Japan, there's formal ceremony and everything starts when the senior person says we start. So I'm cognizant of that as well. So I want to temper that by saying my advice might be different in a different culture. But in the U.S. culture, and we were working U.S. and Canada, it was pretty much the same at least as far as that was. I didn't see too much between U.S. and Canada as far as different cultural stuff. So I just want to throw that in too, that it's not a one-size-fits-all statement.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is we've got to look at cultures. You mentioned cultures earlier when you were working with some people in the Middle East and the fact that they were techies and therefore you had that culture. So I think the thing is culture. There's culture and there's culture, isn't there? There's
organizational culture, Yeah,
you've got organizational culture, you've got nationality culture, you've got community culture, you've got the as you say, the techie culture. You might have a marketing culture, you might have an engineering culture, and like you say, the biopharmacists. Or there will be a culture in those that you can't just sit there and go, because that's in Boston, that's the culture of these type of people. There'll be subcultures, isn't there? And it is literally a subculture within and And they collide as well, don't you? You'll have,
Right.
depending on what's happening, the one person may apply a different behaviour depending on which community / culture they're in at that time. So if they're
Right.
in just the marketing group, or if they're in the wider organisation, they might behave differently.
If speaking of national culture, when I was working with the Middle East, I had never worked or been. I still haven't been there. I read some books, talked to some people, and my number one prime directive was not to offend anybody, and by doing the wrong thing. For example, I happen to know, maybe you know, that if you show the bottom of your shoe in Saudi culture or Arabian culture, it's an insult. So, not that I would have the opportunity to, but that was the idea. Now, I got to talking to the guy who was the director of the IT there. He would send me WhatsApp messages, like he did. He sent me a WhatsApp message, and I said, okay, whatever response. He eventually sent me a thumbs up, and I said, oh, okay, thumbs up is okay. So we use that. But going back to the meeting thing, we would be on calls. And the reason I mentioned techie, because I came from 15 years as a network engineer prior to being in project management. We'd have these calls, these meetings, to discuss setting up the project management office. That was why I was there. And he had two senior guys, a bunch of network people. It was always this two senior guys and him. And we'd be on Zoom or Teams or whatever. And while we were on it, he had on the I don't know what to call it, a costume, the traditional garb that they wear to work. And he'd say, excuse me, and he'd be on the phone talking to a vendor, arguing with a vendor while we're having this meeting. I thought, this is no different than if I was talking to an American guy, other than it's a different culture. He was just like, none of that mattered. It's funny how, so our engineering culture was very similar. He was a guy with a couple of guys, with a couple of people trying to get stuff done, networks rolled out, telecommunications done, and I respected their culture. I'm sure they respected mine. Even when I gave the final presentation, you could hear a pin drop because they just. What I was told was things like culturally with things like make sure you say and Jim recommends X because they respect the consultant or whatever it might have been.
Another great sponsor of the show comes in the form of Air Manual. Air Manual is it's a tool for documenting process, which and best practices. It's a company formed by one of my interviewees, Alexis Kingsbury. Essentially, and I kind of summarised why my view of where we see documentation and my experience has been. People will document something, a process, they'll put it in a Visio diagram that gets loaded onto a SharePoint site or something similar, and then a bunch of that. So then once that diagram's been shared with senior management, they're happy they have a process in the business. But then the detailed procedures underneath it might be in Word documents, in just poorly kept and not linked easily and not updated. And what Air Manual does, it allows you to put in it's a tool for doing this kind of thing. You whack it in, the service in there, get in there, put in your process, your flow, and you build it down to as low a level of detail, even to the point of checklists where people can check off they've done it. So it creates that guided checklists, easy to create, easy to maintain, and all in one place. And no one's kind of rooting around to find the SharePoint, and then when you change to new SharePoint services and all that stuff, it's all there. So if you pop along to nigelcreaser.com/airmanual, there's a bit more detail there and a link there to click on to go and get. I think they offer a trial and things like that. So it's something that I think can easily reduce the amount of errors, rework, etc. within our organisations. So take a look. My latest, the latest affiliate that I've got on the show now is Riverside. I use Riverside to do my interviews, Riverside FM. It kind of offers you a whole, if you like, micro studio management producer tooling and goes beyond that. Has a really good free layer. And I've been using it for a while now. I find it really good. When I've had issues, even though I'm not on one of the higher paid levels, the support has been quick, responsive and of high quality, and people keen to help me. The organisation seems really good. The product seems really intuitive. And quality is really good as well. And it's a clever way of doing it is when you're recording through your browsers, so you're not got loads of desktop resources being used compared to some other products that I've used. And what they also do is they stream a lower quality version of it up onto as you're doing the interview, so you're not burning bandwidth while you're doing the interview and potentially impacting on the quality of the conversation. And then at the end, it uploads it, the higher quality from your browser. It's just a really good way of doing it. So if you are thinking of doing a podcast and know someone who's doing a podcast, I would recommend using this tool. I found it really good. Best of the tools that I've tried using to date. And you can get that at nigelcreaser.com/riverside, and that will redirect you to my kickback page on their site, and there I will get a little kickback from them. So take a look. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed that. But are you thinking, ooh, I wonder what the next bit's going to be? Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? You heard at the beginning of the show where I said there's a way around that. So if you're really itching and you want to hear the next bit of this show, jump down to Patreon, have a look, find the one that's got a little lock on it, click on it, and you'll be able to get the second half along with the first half all together. And you won't get this annoying bit or the annoying bit at the beginning that I just done as well. So, yeah, give it a go. It's only a price of a coffee. Cheers. So this is my final wrap-up. Every week you're going to hear this. You're going to get bored of it, but you can always click next podcast if so. If you have enjoyed it, if you listened to this podcast to the end of this show and you think that was great, I'd love to be able to help Nigel out. There are loads of ways you can do it. The first and obvious way is to share the podcast, send it out to people. If you know colleagues and friends who'd benefit from it, you think they'd enjoy it, just send them the link. Grab one of the links or send them to www.nigelcreaser.com/podcasts. That's www.nigelcreaser.com/podcasts, and that will push them over to a Linktree link, and it's got all of the different ways they can consume the podcast. If you are feeling generous and have a big bag of cash, you could grab a copy of one of my books. Obviously, they're available in all the usual places, in print and digital. Again, jump on the website www.nigelcreaser.com/shop, and that will give you a list of all the different ways that you can contribute and grab copies of the book. Also got links to all my guests' books on there as well, where I get a little bit of a kickback from them. If you are of a sporting mind, I have a number through doing some of my judo and running antics. I've managed to secure a few affiliate links and affiliates there as well. So in there, somewhere in the sponsors page, there's links to those as well. So clicking onto those and grabbing if you're looking to get super fit, then that would be fabulous as well. And I get a little kickback from those. I have a Patreon account. It's patreon.com/sundaylunchpm. So again, you can ping something in there, buy me a coffee or whatever. And finally, obviously the most important is coming back, listen again, because the more of you that come back, the more visibility I get, because there's more times that it's downloaded and all the SEO works and things like that. So yeah, that's it. So if you can help me out, I would be much appreciated. If you can't, don't worry about it. Thank you very much. Cheers now. Bye. Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser. And it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.